Parents have the God-given duty to actively guide, instruct, and make decisions for their children. God gave them the role, and this authority and responsibility continues until the child reaches adulthood. The most common document cited in the writings of the founders was the Bible, and so going to that source, the Bible tells us the role between parents and children. If you're a person that truly believes that men are men, women are women, and there's only two sexes, and you can't change the two, then this is a perfectly fine thing. Good morning, Idaho, and welcome to the local Yocal Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, we'd like to have a little bit of a banter before we get into the stories, but I understand if you're short on time, so we provided the timestamps down in the description so you can jump straight to the stories that you're interested in. With that said, for those that stayed with the banter, welcome. Glad to have you here with us. I hope you had a wonderful week. I know I did. The weather has just been so amazing down here in the Treasure Valley. I hope it's been the same for you guys over in eastern Idaho. I think you guys had some tornado warnings or different stuff going over there, which if you don't know about the tornadoes, we did a weird, I think it was like extreme weather series at one point on the Sunday show. You can go back and find those episodes. But anywho, suffice to say, for the weather here in the Treasure Valley, it's actually been really pleasant. Last Thursday evening, I went out to Emmett and it was just picture perfect. Maybe a little windy in the first half, but just amazing weather. The smoke had finally gone away. You could see the blue sky. It was cool, maybe like 80, 70 or whatever. I was hanging out with some people and some of them commented like, I wish it could be like this all year. I was hanging out with some people there and one of the comments that came up was like, oh, I wish it was like this all the time here in Idaho. And I responded back that if it was that way all the time, then we really would value the time when we do have it, because we wouldn't have the contrast of when it's bad and rainy and overcast and smoky and all these different things. So the whole reason we enjoy it so much is because we have that contrast, which is why I love seasons. I would not be able personally to stand having it be the same temperature and weather all the time. Something like that it would drive me bat loony, because I need the change. I need the variation. It regulates certain aspects and things in my life. But speaking of aspects and regulating things for people's lives, I know probably a lot of you are back to college or just general public school. Hopefully that is all going well. Here again, shameless plug, but if you're curious about some of the interesting things, like, wait a second, we're having a 4-day school week or different things that are happening at your schools. We did a segment on that, I think, last Sunday show before last. You can go check out, but hopefully those policies are working out and it's comfortable. It'll also be interesting to see if any reports come out about explicit material in library schools or not, but hopefully school's starting out for you well, and for the parents, logistics are working out well there. I know it can be an exciting transitionary time. Hopefully the momentum can carry into the next year. School time almost to me sometimes feels New Year's, where everyone has these new resolutions. I'm going to read this much, I'm going to study this much, and this is going to be a different year, and I'm having amazing teachers, or especially with college and things. But then as you get halfway and you're sitting there at December, so you have the fall school year, and then you get into the next spring one, you're just like, what happened? I had all these glorious plans like January. So hopefully you can hold to those, and then it'll be amazing and you'll stay on top of all your studies. Best advice is a to-do list, and just do it right away. Do it now before it gets worse. It will pile up. And speaking of things with parents and school and decisions and stuff like that, we'll move into our first segment here, which is our Idaho Bill breakdown. Last week, we talked about House Bill 666 and how it bans abortion providers from influencing sex ed in public schools. This week, we'll be looking at a similar bill that's related, but more on the medical procedure side. More on that later. It's Senate Bill 1329, which aims to give parents the final say about medical treatment given to their children. In this Idaho Bill breakdown, we'll look at how the bill goes about giving parents that final say. We'll also look at what the laws was before this, address maybe some concerns or objections you might have, and see how this will affect your everyday life as an Idahoan. But first, to do that, we have to look at what the bill actually says. The bill was sponsored by Senator Kelly Anton in the Senate and Representative Barbara Earhart in the House. Its purpose is to reaffirm the fundamental rights of parents to access healthcare information and make their children's healthcare decisions. As for how it goes about this, it adds a new section, 32-1015, to the Idaho Code focusing on parental rights and medical decision making. The key points of this include affirming parents' fundamental right to make healthcare decisions for their minor children, arguing that parents have the fundamental right and duty to make decisions concerning healthcare services for their children. It requires healthcare providers to obtain parental consent before furnishing or soliciting to furnish healthcare services to minor children. It guarantees parents access to their children's health information, with just 3 exceptions. There's only a small carve out for this. The first is when the parents have given blanket consent. It's basically, why do I need to give you more consent? I've already given you all, so you don't need to check with me here. The second is in medical emergencies, where the service is necessary to prevent death or immediate imperishable physical injury. Basically, in summation, if the child's life is at danger and you can't get a hold of the adult, or it's something that needs to be decided right there by a doctor, then go for it, right? We'd rather have the person alive, and then we can discuss the details after. And then the last one, the third one, exception there would be court orders prohibiting access or ongoing law enforcement investigation related to crimes against children. So if there's a crime that's been done against the child that maybe the adults are implicated in, then the court can step in and say, hey, you don't have access or something to that. So it carves out a little bit of protection there if there's parental abuse. And then the last part of this bill, like any bill that's passed, it needs a certain amount of teeth in that law to make it enforceable. It provides a legal cause of action for parents that if their rights under this law were violated by individuals, healthcare providers, or government entities, the ability to use this law as a defense in judicial or administrative proceedings for the potential recovery of declaratory relief, injunctory relief, compensative damages, and attorney's fees. Now that we know what the bill says, we also need to see the background of what preceded this bill. What did we have? Idaho law did not have any specific provisions detailing parents' rights in medical decision-making for their minor children. With that said, parents did generally have the right to make medical decisions for their children, but there just wasn't a comprehensive law addressing consent requirements, access to health information, and legal resources for parents if these rights were violated. So basically, like, it was an understood parents have that decision, but there's really not anything on the books to tell us exactly how that process works. Now, with this bill, there is something like that. So, coming into summary, Senate Bill 1329 adds a section to Idaho Code stating that in most cases, parents/legal guardians have the final sign-off on medical treatments for minors in their care, with exceptions made for when the life of the minor is objectively in danger or the parent cannot be reached in the case of an emergency. Now, we've gone through that. We've got what the bill says. We also have the past precedent to understand what came before it. But moving forward and applying what this means, I think the first element before we get into any more of our application, I think is very important. And depending on which part of the aisle you're on, will really change how you see this bill. The first is basically the understanding between parents and children. One argument or one side of it, I would say, that you see very commonly is parents are the masters of their children, and what happens to their children is their fault and not the children's. So that the parents have ultimate authority over the children to raise them and nurture them and correct them when they do wrong. And any ill that's done to the child is the parent's fault, not the child's fault, because the child is not an adult yet, and thus they are subservient to their parents' authority. The second one, which is a little bit more of a modern definition, is that parents are the child's helper, but the child ultimately decides what they want to do, and the parents have to respect that. From the perspective of, hey, I'm a parent, I keep you safe, I create a sandbox that you can't get hurt, but ultimately if the child wants to do things that hurt themselves, then that's their decision, they have to be allowed to do that. So 2 different ways of looking at it. One is that the parent is the final authority, one that the child is more the final authority, and a parent is just an enabler or a vehicle or a platform for them. The counter I would give that from a more traditional perspective, and also one that would be biblically inspired, is parents have the God-given duty to actively guide, instruct, and make decisions for their children. That's what God gave them the role as. And this authority and responsibility continues until the child reaches adulthood. Ultimately, though, I'm not saying that they need to be super strict until the time that the child turns 18 or whatever. There is a transitionary. When you have a child that's 5 years of age, you're going to be a lot more strict. Daddy, why don't I do that? You don't do that because I told you not to do that. It's not that you need to explain them because they're not a 17-year-old. They're a 7-year-old. There's a big difference there. But as the child gets older, you give them more responsibility. You tell them the reasoning behind it and the presuppositions so they can start acting on their own. But when they're young, when they are a child, the parent has that ultimate authority. Now, if you're not in the biblical realm, I totally understand that, but I would argue the Bible is one of those founding documents that both inspired the Constitution. If you look, I think there was some research study done on it to see that the most common document cited and in the writings of the founders that was most regularly gone to for the inspiration of the Constitution and just the majority of Western culture was the Bible. And so going to that source, when the Bible tells us how we are, the role between parents and children, specific verses I recommend to look at is Ephesians 6:4, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, Proverbs 13:24, Hebrews 12:7-11, and Proverbs 22:6 for that. Now, with that backdrop of kind of the two different definitions of parents, we can start diving into this a little bit more deeply. The first one, just understanding some of the concerns and desires why this bill came out. I would argue the first reason this came out is COVID-19. We just had that. There are a ton of instances where government said, hey, your child's got to get the vaccine. And the adult said, I don't want my child to have the vaccine. And government said, I don't care. The child's having the vaccine. And so I think that would probably be a response to it. Another is transgender surgeries, where maybe you have conservative parents and the child wants to get that surgery or is confused about something. And the parents say no. But then in other states or places, I know the most famous I can think of right now is over in Canada, where the child said, no, I wanted it. And the court ruled, yes, the child can get that surgery and the adult can't stop it. So probably another reaction, another one being abortions, where say the parents were like, no, you can't have an abortion. And then the medical establishment said no and overruled the parents and did it anyways. Another part of the concern reasons is like quality of treatment and speed of treatment, coming more from the left side of it. One's conservative, one's more left-leaning. Which, speaking of those concerns, that kind of transitions well into our objections. I wrote out a couple here. I went on Twitter and tried to look at a couple of the arguments objecting to this bill and saying it. Obviously, you can see the ones for it, which is that parents have that ultimate authority. And I just wanted to go through those. The first one that I found was impact on confidentiality and safety, that the bill would compromise the confidentiality or safety of minors, especially in cases where the minor needs access to healthcare or services without parental consent due to fear or abuse or neglect or something like that, where the household isn't really great, including kind of some concerns I saw there about minors having access to mental health services, contraception, and treatment for sexually transmitted infections and stuff if something came up and they didn't want to tell their parents. So if they can't tell their parent can't sign off on it. To that one, I can see the legitimate concern that comes with that. Part of that, number one, I would say is that, yes, this bill already has a bit that's carved out here for legal cases where, say, the child has taken maybe some legal action or something or gone to someone and taken that action where the court can shield the child from that. Now, obviously, I could hear the counter argument. I'm talking about more minor things. A minor shouldn't have to go to court for sexually transmitted diseases and mental health and stuff like that. And my answer would be, one, the sexually transmitted diseases, they shouldn't be dealing with that. First off, if they're having that, then that's the fruit of your actions. You did those actions, and so here's the fruit of it. And so hopefully if you have loving parents, then you need to tell them, because they're your legal guardians. They have authority over you, and they ought to know how basically you've sinned so they can help work with you through that. But on the other hand, with like mental health, I don't know if that would land under this medical part. It may not, but I would argue there's many places you can get mental health. Church being a perfect example where you don't need to sign off of some medical professional. And if you really need that, or other confidants, or for crying out loud, there's so many different resources on the internet that you could access or something rather than a formal mental health institution, which I have my own concerns about that, but take it as you will. I can see some of the concerns in this, and it gets really tricky when you do have parents that are neglectful and aren't good parents. But just because of a minority of bad parents, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. As a society, we ought to structure our rules in such a way to protect the lower, the minor, the weaker person. But we shouldn't do that at the expense of how God argues is that this should work. But moving into the next one, barriers to medical care, similar to that it would act as a barrier for minors who might wouldn't seek care due to parental reaction or lack of parental support. My argument would be that's the responsibility of parents. If there's a care that the minor should be getting, and the parents are blocking that or whatever, as long as it's not life-threatening, that responsibility lands on the parents. It really does. And if the parents are at fault, then they are at fault and they should be punished, but not the child. This idea of seeing the child as an adult or as a parent or something, there's a reason they're a minor and not an adult. They shouldn't have all the freedoms that an adult has. The next one would be potential for delaying or preventing investigations, so concerns that the law would impede investigations into child sexual abuse, especially if a predator is a parent or guardian. This exemption stems from the idea that requiring parental consent could delay or prevent necessary medical examinations or evidence collection, which may be critical in legal proceedings. There again, my counter would be that the bill already has an exception carved out in there in the legal proceedings. When that happens, then the child can go, and that legal proceeding, it carves that out where the parents aren't involved in that, and they can be seen. Obviously, I would not be shocked at all that, say, a doctor sits there and sees certain signs, maybe rape or something, or some form of abuse, that they might step in and take legal action, and then it has to escalate to a court or whatever, right? So I would say there's a worthwhile exception that addresses this concern, which I'm very glad that the bill writers put in there. And if they didn't have it in there, I would be mad and be like, no, this is a fully warranted objection. This bill does not go far enough and fill the needs that are required. As for preventing potential delay on treatment, I would say if there's concerns already by the medical establishment about doing a treatment that may get them in hot water or something, they maybe shouldn't be doing it in the first place, especially there again, if it's not necessary for the life, being, or detrimental harm of the child, like we read earlier. The bill specifically is talking about how if there really is something life-threatening to the child, they'll get that treatment. Now, if it's maybe something more minor, that lands on the adult, and that's then their responsibility, and they are culpable for it. The next one is a bit more of a libertarian one, which is overreach of government into family affairs. My argument is this is actually the government giving more of their control away. Overreach would be if the government says, no, we have exact control in what your family, what you as adults can say your child can do. This is giving more authority back to the child. So I don't really quite get that argument, but I did see it made a little bit there. Discrimination and stigmatization. This one mainly circles around the argument that it would discriminate and affect groups like transgender youth, which I understand. If you see transgender people as real people that need those surgeries or things to bring them to their true self, then you would see this bill as that way. But if you're a person that truly believes, and I think there's a wonderful argument, and I'm not going to get into right now, that men are men, women are women, and there's only two sexes, and you can't change the two, then this is a perfectly fine thing. Because if you have a child that then is having this feeling that, oh, I'm in the wrong body, I have the wrong feelings, I'm a woman and I'm not a guy, or vice versa, then the adult ought to be like, no, you're a child. You don't know. I'm an adult. That is my responsibility to know and to guide you. And so, no, you can't do that. Another one is legal and ethical concerns. This one I hadn't heard until I did research for it, which is that there's a legal debate on how this law interacts with existing federal laws and rights. One example of it is some family planning programs, which allow minors to access certain reproductive health services without parental consent. So this might cause confusion and stuff. The answer I would give to that objection is I have no doubt if it's going to conflict, it's going to come up in court. And then we will see where that moves forward in court. This is a perfect example of where you have states more exercising their will, which I am all thumbs up for. The will of the people should be exercised at their local level. And then federal laws and seeing which one gives way to which. So the court system will decide that out. But I think it's a warranted one in a sense. Was the national law a good one? That's something we can discuss at a later point. But the nature that it exists there, and there may be conflicts, is a warranted objection. Another one is that it provides a dilemma for healthcare providers in the sense that they might not treat a minor for something for fear of repercussions or something else. There again, I touched on it earlier. If a healthcare provider is worried about that with a minor, maybe you shouldn't be doing it, is my counter. Just saying. And it also doesn't delay treatment in moments where the person's life is at risk. There's totally an exemption where it's like, oh, the adults or the parents don't want the child to get, I don't know, a heart surgery or some drug that'll stabilize them to be able to get further treatment or diagnose the issue or whatever else. Yeah, this law would allow that to happen. It does not prevent that. It prevents medical establishment doing something without consulting the parent, which is, I think, a fully warranted thing. So that's how I would address that. And the overall kind of unintended consequences of healthcare stuff. Now, Bring to the end here. I'm trying to make sure I wanted to go through this quickly, but still address them because there's definitely warranted concerns as we see in there and ones that are understandable and you might have had. I just wanted to address there. I know there was a lot there. I tried to speed through it, but I think it's really warranted to look at those different positions and concerns and really address them because some of them I did have a little bit, and then reading and researching and looking at them and figuring out those objections, I found some answers. I was like, oh, okay. Or other ones that I heard that I was like, no, that's a very warranted one. But coming back to what does this mean for you as the average Idahoan? Specifically for parents, you'll have more control over your child's medical care and potentially feel more empowered in decision making. You'll also have easier access to your child's health records and information. Plus, in cases where you may feel that your rights as a parent have been violated with your child, there'll be a much clearer legal pathway to seek with it. Specifically for minors on that side, because there's probably those out there, will probably face some additional barriers and things to access certain things without parental consent. So need to go check with mommy and daddy on that one. And then specifically for healthcare providers, which, they are average Idahoans. There's Idahoans. I know many that work in the healthcare industry will need to be maybe a little bit more cautious about treating minors without getting explicit parental consent for certain actions and things. I would argue you're probably already doing this. If you are a medical person that's doing stuff in the medical industry, comment down below if this is something you're already doing, but this just gives you more clear guidelines on it. But that would be the takeaway for that. Yeah, snapshot. 500,000 view. Parents, you'll have more control over stuff medically that's going on with your child. Minors, got to check with mom and dad on that. And healthcare providers will just have to be a little bit more cautious or just have a better framework of doing what they already do. Which, if you enjoyed the Idaho Bill Breakdown, we have a midweek report where we cover all the latest stories going on in Idaho. So make sure to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter to stay up to date on all things Idaho. For even more content and to support our work, you can check out our Substack page. We're working on building that out. If you have found our content valuable, please like and share it with your friends and family. Your support can help us spread the word about our beautiful state and keep Idahoans informed and engaged with it. Thank you for being part of the local Yocal Idaho community. Now, on to the next segment. Which, getting out of all the stuffy bills and laws and regulations and stuff and getting out from civilization, as the end of summer is closing here, many of us, including myself, are trying to fit in our last outdoor trips for the year, while places aren't quite as busy as they would normally be during the middle of summer, and also more comfortable. It's cooler out, just like I said, going to Emmett. In this segment, I wanted to go through a list of ideas that you and your family could do for summer activities and day trips because of the temperatures being lower and just being less people. I've broken it down into 3 groups. One is the Southwest or Treasure Valley area, Eastern Idaho and Northern Idaho. For Eastern Idaho, looking at things near Pocatello, Idaho Falls, because that's the biggest cities over there. And then in Northern Idaho, looking at the Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, and then the Lewiston and Moscow area. For each one, we'll look at some fun day activities and then some fun trips you can take. But starting off here with the Treasure Valley, the first one I would recommend is the Lucky Peak State Park up there. It's just about 10 miles east of Boise, and it's a perfect place to do some swimming or picnicking or fishing or boating if you don't like to get wet. And there's this really cool little park down by the dam there that you can do, the reservoir, and you can have a picnic or you can wade out into the water. They do a really good job of keeping it nice and clean, and it's a short little drive away, and if you've got little kids, probably a fun thing to go do. Also, the water is regularly pretty cool when it's coming out of the reservoir there. Another one, if you're not like me, someone who doesn't like water as much, Bogus Basin Mountain Recreational Area. You can do hiking trails, there's mountain biking, there's a mountain coaster I think up there, there's disc golf if you're super into that. I think there's like a challenge rope course, and generally it's also cooler, so if it's 80 or 70 here in the valley, it's probably 60 or something up there, which is super nice if you're trying to stay cool when doing physical activities and that. Plus the hiking trails, I think it's only 30 minutes from Boise, and then if you're on the more west end of the valley, it'll only be maybe 45 to an hour to get up there. So also some really good fun options if you don't want to go too far afoot. Another one that you may not know if you just moved here is Roaring Springs Water Park, which I had to go look this up because I heard it and I wasn't sure if it was true. It is the largest in the Pacific Northwest. There is no larger water park, and it is in the top 5 largest in the United States. So if you want to go to something that is really actually unique nationally, and also if you love water and you're the complete opposite of me, Roaring Springs, they've continued to build that out. I think there's like a wave pool. I don't know if they extended it into the new part of the park, but they had this river that kind of goes through it. and you can just float the whole way around if you're a person who doesn't like big drops and stuff and just want to casual stuff. Also, there's food and stuff in there. It's a fun thing to go do. And then my last one here for the simple ones is the World Birds of Prey Center. They have a bunch of different the great falcons there that you can go to that they kind of have in captivity. I think also coming into October here, they'll have their fall air show where they'll have falconers, people that work with the falcons and different stuff that will fly over you, and they'll talk about the different birds and educate. Especially even in like cold winter months, you can still go there and walk inside of it. It's a really cool thing to go see, and it's, I think, less than 30-minute drive from Boise, might be 45 from the west end of the valley, but a super great place to check out if you haven't already done it. But if you want to go a little further, like I regularly like to do, the first one I recommend is Emmett. If you're going to go visit there, you can go up by the Black Canyon Reservoir. It's just a little bit above it there, and it also is similar to the Lucky Peak area. They've got a nice park. I'll link it down in the description. You can go to that. Also, Rowan's Diner, really great place to get food there in Emmett. If you don't want to travel to Emmett, you want to stay a little bit more on the freeway, you can also go over to Weezer. There's a bit more antique stuff over there, and there's the Weezer Classic Candy Company. Really great place to get candy and food. They have some of the best BLTs ever. Highly recommend going and checking that out. And then if you're wanting something more in the mountains and stuff for a little bit of a day trip, you could go up to McCall. Really pretty to go up there in the Ponderosa State Park. There's tons of really accessible, easy hiking trails to do, or just a little further north up by New Meadows. And then if you want to just see some gorgeous mountains and maybe just to drive, you can go to the Stanley and Sawtooth area. Thankfully, the fire that was over there has been put out, so you can go and enjoy that. I would highly recommend it. Plus, Stanley holds the record of being the coldest place in Idaho, so if the heat is just killing you and you want to be in a freezer box, Stanley's probably going to be that. And then if you want to do like the furthest, there's Sun Valley, also really cool. There's a botanical gardens and different stuff. It's probably an easier drive for those over in eastern Idaho, but still a great place to go visit there and see the mountains and beauty, especially if you're listening to this and there's some fall colors going on, it'll be crazy over there. Plus the Bruneau Sand Dunes, if you want to have some fun with your motorized sport vehicles and stuff, or just watch the stars. I think the Bruneau Sand Dunes got designated as a dark sky, I want to say reservation, but basically it's really dark over there and you can see the stars really pretty. Speaking of stuff that's really pretty, moving up to northern Idaho and the Coeur d'Alene/Post Falls area, there are a lot of lakes up there that are really pretty. They can do a lot of different activities, such as kayaking or paddleboarding. There's also, I think, a sunset dinner lake cruise there with a paddle boat you can go on, or you can just hang out on the beach and enjoy the sounds of it and go swimming or sunbathing and stuff. And if you're someone who doesn't want to get wet as much and just likes to explore nature, there are a lot of really great hiking trails nearby. There's whitewater rafting nearby as well. For all the hiking stuff, I'll leave a link for it below, but All Trails is a wonderful application for it. It's like Google Maps for trails. So if you're in that area, you can pull it up on your computer. The paid version gives you some extra benefits, but you can still see all the trails that you would normally without the paid bit. But if you're coming down a little lower towards the Lewiston, Moscow area, you can visit the Idaho Arboretum and Botanical Gardens. Super, super, super pretty there in Moscow. It never gets old to go see, and it's always changing color. They have it divided per biome. So you have Europe and Asia and different areas, and it's always super well kept, super, super pretty. Highly recommend, especially if you're going when there's the fall colors. There's also the Latah Trail. It's a 12-mile paved trail connecting Troy and Moscow between the two of them. Hopefully I got that. It's spelled Troy. I haven't been up over by that town yet. I'm guessing it said Troy, but bear with me. If you're a local, you can comment down below about how I pronounce things badly. But that's something you can go do if you want to go ride bikes or just go on a walk and stuff. It sounds like a really cool thing, almost like the Greenbelt down here in the Treasure Valley. And then also for local events, I've heard nothing but raving reviews about this, and it goes until October. It's the Moscow Farmers Market. I've heard that there's just so many goodies there, be it from food to, I think there's even some antique stuff I've heard that's been there, and even clothing or things. That might be something you really want to check out if you just don't want to leave too far from town, or you're down in Lewiston, which there's also a lot of good things to go see down Lewiston. I think there's the Jack O'Connor Museum is there if you want to go down a little further. Plus, Tomato Brothers make some amazing Italian if you want to go visit there. And then coming back down and over towards eastern Idaho for those outdoor activities, you have the St. Anthony Sand Dunes, not quite as big as the Bruno Sand Dunes, but they're less than an hour north of Idaho Falls. And you can experience the White Quartz Sands Dunes there, which are really perfect for hiking and horseback riding and ATVing and playing with all your toys out there. But if you don't want to be outside and you want to just relax in the cool fall temperatures, there's the Lava Hot Springs. Those are about 45 minutes southeast of Pocatello. And it's really nice just to soak and loosen up in those if you want to go do that. Plus I think there is a river nearby you can float and go down. So that's another thing that's an option if you're going over that direction. And then there's also the Pebble Creek Ski Resort, which I get it. It's a ski resort. You can't use it yet. But there are some really pretty hiking trails and some really scenic views you can see in late summer over there. So if you're a hiker or just want to get out into nature, that's a really good option as well, independent of the skiing part. And plus, there probably won't be as many people there. Now, if you want to see some really pretty views that are really unique to Idaho, and it's Idaho like hugs over by Yellowstone, which is something you can go visit if you're over there in eastern Idaho. I think I have it somewhere else in my notes down here for a day trip. But I think it's a shorter trip to go to this, is the Craters of the Moon. It's one of the most unique lava formations in the world there. NASA used it to test a couple of their rovers for the Apollo missions. Plus, with it being late summer, the temperature should be cooler and a lot nicer to be out there. Plus, I hear the stars are just gorgeous because there's not a lot of light out there. But if you're looking more for day trips, Sun Valley is a great area. I'd recommend that to go see the botanical gardens there. Plus, they have some of the best hiking in the nation. It's been rated by a ton of different publications over there by Bald Mountain. Plus, the fall colors are really pretty if you're going there after the first frost. Would highly recommend it. And speaking, if you're willing to drive and go a little further, there's the Sawtooth Scenic Byway. I've heard about it. I've always wanted to do it. Also, the Teton Scenic Byway. If you just want to go for a drive and enjoy the views and have a conversation with someone in the car. I haven't done them, but I've heard a ton of people that have, and they're just really pretty, especially after that first frost. So if you can time that just there, probably be amazing. And also, as I teased, there's Yellowstone, which is about 2 hours drive from Idaho Falls, which it need not any introduction. Yellowstone is one of the most stunning national parks that the United States has to offer. And in late summer, it's an excellent time to visit because there's less crowds and also cooler temperatures and all the added colors that you get there with the park. So all that said, I wanted to go through those. Hopefully it wasn't too quick at rapid fire, but it gives you a good idea of some stuff you can do last minute to wrap up the season if maybe your classes aren't too heavy yet and you can sneak out for maybe a Saturday trip with your new roommate or in the area, or if there's just some fun things you want to do before the cold kind of sets in. And I know I probably sound crazy. I'm like, Tyler, you're talking about cold and it's 90 out in some areas of the state. Why are you talking about it? For Idaho, we can get freezing like the last part of September. It is not far away, and if I know anything about summer and fall, it goes by in a blink. So right now probably is a good time to plan those trips before it gets away from you and you're like, oh, we wanted to do that, but we never got to it. Because Idaho's falls are very short. It's springs. Spring for us is like maybe 3 weeks, possibly a week. Sometimes it varies. Fall, really, like the fall you would think of like back east, really only lasts for maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 if you're stretching it. And so planning right now to do some of these things and go and visit them is probably good because you have a short window to fit it in there before we get our cold season that runs from November all the way to March, sometimes even April, some years. But if there's places that I missed and you think people should know about, please leave a comment below. I'll try to pin or like them so they show up further up so people can see them there. Because at the end of the day, I want people to know more about Idaho and how much it's just so amazing and so beautiful and all the amazing things you can go do to explore it. But sadly, that brings me to the end of the episode here. Hopefully you found it enjoyable and informative. If we missed anything important or got something wrong, please reach out to us via email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or on Twitter @localyocalidaho. We appreciate your support and feedback as we work to bring you the most interesting and important stories from across Idaho. That's all for now. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and Godspeed.